Hello, my name is Mac Anderson, and this is my personal best leadership project for the course MDS 410 Case Studies in Leadership at Boise State University. The leadership opportunity that I had the privilege of choosing for this project was the 2018 Treasure Valley MS Walk. But before I get into any of the specifics, I wanted to talk about why this cause is so important to me. First off, what is MS? Well, according to the Mayo Clinic's website, multiple sclerosis, or MS, is a potentially disabling disease of the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system. In MS, the immune system attacks the protective sheath that covers nerve fibers and causes communication problems between your brain and the rest of your body. Eventually, the disease can cause nerves themselves to deteriorate or become permanently damaged. The signs and symptoms of MS vary widely and depend on the amount of nerve damage and the nerves that are affected. Some people with MS uh, may lose the ability to walk independently or at all, while others may experience long periods of remission without any new symptoms. As of right now, there's no cure for multiple sclerosis. However, treatments can help speed the recovery from attacks, modify the course of the disease, and manage symptoms. Some of the additional signs and symptoms of MS are numbness and weakness in one or more limbs that typically occurs on one side of your body at a time, or the legs or the trunk. Partial or complete loss of vision, usually in one eye at a time, often with pain during eye movement. Prolonged double vision, tingling or pain in parts of the body, electric shock sensations that occur with certain neck movements, especially when bending the neck forward, which is called the Lermute sign. Tremor or lack of coordination or unsteady gait, slurred speech, fatigue, dizziness, and problems with bowel and bladder function. My inspiration to become involved with the MS Society comes from the woman that has had the largest impact on my life, my mother. My mom was diagnosed with MS on July 5th, 1996, 5 months after giving birth to my sister. I don't remember much from that day, but I've reached out to my mom to get her thoughts and feelings on her diagnosis. According to her, a few weeks before her actual diagnosis, she started to notice that she was having trouble with her vision and walking while she was at work. She didn't have any peripheral vision, but at the time, she didn't immediately want to go to see a doctor because they had company visiting from out of town at their new house. The symptoms persisted, though, and she finally decided to see a doctor. She said that as soon as the doctor looked in her eye, he could see that she had optic neuritis, or inflammation of the optic nerve. At first, the doctor thought that this could be some sort of tumor on the optic nerve and sent her to get an MRI. So she had the MRI, and it showed that she had multiple areas of inflammation throughout her brain. According to her, there were more than 30 specific areas of the inflammation, or lesions as she called them. The doctor said that it looked like typical symptoms of MS, but he wanted to confirm it. She was sent to have a spinal puncture and lab work done, and it was later confirmed on July 5th, 1996, that she did in fact have MS. For the first couple of years after the diagnosis, she had trouble walking and she had trouble with her vision. She experimented with a few different MS medications, but she didn't really tolerate some of them very well, and the ones that she could tolerate required her to take a daily shot. She eventually stopped taking the medications. They seemed to cause more problems than they fixed, and luckily for her, her symptoms ended up getting relatively better. She still notices that her vision is getting slightly worse, and she has some issues with grip and control over her right hand. But overall, she has far less symptoms than the average patient, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So my mom was very generous. She was generous enough to provide recent images of the MRAs taken of her brain for the purpose of this presentation. The images shown on this slide are those of someone who currently has inactive lesions on their brain as a result of MS. As you can see, the white areas of the scan are areas where she has inflammation on the nerves. And we can compare that to someone that is showing active symptoms of MS. In these images, you can see that the white areas of the brain are significantly brighter than those shown in the previous slide. My mom's involvement with the MS Society. She's been involved with the MS Society for a long time. She told me stories about the MS walks that she attended in Springfield, Illinois when I was growing up. This was whenever she was first diagnosed. I don't remember much about the MS walks, but I vividly remember her participation in Bike MS. She participated in the 2003 Bike MS event that took place on June 21st and June 22nd, 2003. It's a 150-mile bike ride from Chicago, Illinois to Bloomington, Illinois. Uh, I would have been 9 years old at the time of the event, and although I wasn't actually present at the ride, I do remember her training for the event. She approached it with so much passion and determination. I remember her leaving 2 to 3 hours early for family gatherings about 30 miles away, so that she could ride her bike to the gathering. My dad, sister, and I would get in the car a few hours later to go to my grandpa's house, and we would drive. And the same route that she biked, we would look out the window the whole car ride and wait for the moment when we finally passed my mom on her bike. And then when we got to my grandpa's house, we would wait for my mom to get there. And although I didn't realize it at the time, it took so much serious determination to ride her bike all that way. And that was a short ride compared to the 150-mile bike ride that she would later make. My mom hasn't participated in a Bike MS event since then, but she's currently training to participate in a second one here in the near future. And I hope that at some point I'm able to join her on one of these rides. The Bike MS event was the first time that I'd ever been exposed to the MS Society, and honestly, I had no idea what it was that they actually did. But I knew that they supported people with MS, like my mom, and I knew that they were a great organization because of it. So I'll now transition into the portion of my presentation where I'll actually talk about my personal best leadership project. But first, I want to talk about how I first discovered my passion for community service. So I was in the Air Force from 2012 to 2016. And when I first got in, I hadn't really done much of community service in my life. Really, I hadn't done any at all. And I didn't really have much interest in doing so. But in the Air Force, your supervision often volunteers you to participate in events in the community. At first, I was just doing one day events where I would volunteer, I would show up for a few hours to food drives or prepping food at the food bank. I knew that what I was doing was good, but I wasn't really able to see much of an impact, and therefore I lacked the motivation to stay involved. It wasn't until 2014 when I discovered Camp Rainbow Gold, a local summer camp for children in Idaho with cancer, and that was when I really found my passion for community service. It was a week long camp, and you could actually see the impact that you were making on these kids' lives. It was at that point uh, when I realized that I had a passion for community service and I should chase the opportunities that included more involvement, so that I could actually see the impact that I was making. From there, I started tutoring at a local middle school, and that was once a week for a year. And that gave me the same feeling of fulfillment that Camp Rainbow Gold gave me. From there, I stayed heavily involved with those organizations, and I found one of the greatest passions in my life. So now, fast forward a few years later, I'm now a student at Boise State University, and I've joined a fraternity. I ran and was elected as the community service chairman of my fraternity during my first semester as an active member. That was spring of 2017. During that semester, I organized a few events, much like the ones that I didn't really care about while I was in the Air Force. Events where you would just show up for a few hours and you wouldn't really see the impact that you were making. I was looking for a big event, something that could spark some of the same passion that I had for Camp Rainbow Gold and my brothers. Um, so, about midway through the semester, I received an email from someone at the MS Society that wanted our fraternity to send a few members to the MS walk to cheer on the walkers as they walked. Um, and I was all in. I knew that the MS Society was a great organization, and it was something that I wanted to get involved in. And uh, if I could instill that same spark that I have for community service in my brothers with the MS Walk, that would be incredible. Um, so after we exchanged a few emails, it was clear that our participation could be so much more than just the few members to cheer on the walkers. They needed a lot of help, and we had enough people that we could come and help them. We ended up making it a mandatory community service day, not necessarily for the walk, but all of our members just had to be doing some sort of community service on that day. And we had 60 people that ended up showing up to volunteer at the walk, while other members of the fraternity volunteered elsewhere. The event was a success. I had multiple brothers approaching me after the event to let me know that the MS Walk should become an annual service event for our fraternity. It warmed my heart to see that my brothers were so enthusiastic about supporting a cause that I cared so much about, and I was going to ensure that this would become an annual event. Fast forward again to this current semester. After serving a second consecutive semester as the community service chair in the fall, I decided that I would not run for a third consecutive term. I figured that it was time to give someone else an opportunity and experience in that position. I, however, was running on the stipulation that I could still be heavily involved with the MS Walk. Our involvement with the MS Society this semester started with a meeting that I had with the new director of the Southern Idaho chapter. She wanted information about the previous year's walk and how many volunteers we brought. This would be her first MS walk as the director, and she wanted to make a few changes. The first of which was that she was moving the walk from Ann Morrison Park in Boise to Kleiner Memorial Park in Meridian in hopes to attract more walkers from Western Idaho and Oregon. It would be a further travel for our brothers, but it was absolutely in the best interest of the walk. And then our next contribution and our first hiccup came in March, which is MS Awareness Month, when it was time for us to place flags for MS awareness outside of the Cincy complex in Meridian. We were unable to get any participation for this event. It ended up just being myself and the current community service chair placing the flags, something that took us 3 hours to complete, where it would have only taken, about 30 minutes if we had more participation. This had us worried that if we weren't able to get participation for just placing flags, that we wouldn't be able to get participation for the actual walk. We, however, didn't communicate the flag placing very well. We made one post on the fraternity Facebook page a week ahead of time, and then one more a few hours before our actual planned flag placing. So we figured that it could have just been an issue with the communication, and we vowed that we were going to make um, communication a priority for upcoming events. We again ran into a few hiccups when we realized that our fraternity's spring fling and formal were planned for that same weekend, the weekend of the 14th of April, uh, the same weekend as the walk. This word is quite a bit. These are events that go late into the night and may prevent our brothers from willingly participating in the event. The community service chair and myself met with our fraternity's executive board and talked about it. Our greatest concern that we'd already committed to having volunteers show up at 6 a.m. To help set up for the walk, and upon just asking the director of the Southern Idaho MS Society and talking to our board or executive board of the fraternity, we figured that we'd be okay with uh, only around 10 volunteers at that time. So we figured that we'd be okay as long as we tried to get people that weren't attending the spring fling the night before. We asked our fraternity's president also to make this a mandatory community service event in order to increase participation. We weren't concerned whether people would want to volunteer, but it was more a matter of it just being such a busy week that people may want to use that time as some downtime. Our president agreed that this event should be a mandatory, and he announced it to the chapter. About 2 weeks before the walk, the community service chair created a poll and posted it on Facebook. The poll reminded everyone that attendance is mandatory, and unless you had a good excuse and asked people to, um, unless you had a good excuse, you weren't going to be excused from the walk. He asked people to reply to the poll with the shifts that they were able to work. The options were 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for the setup of the walk, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. for people that were going to actually work during the walk, and then 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. to help for the teardown of the walk after it was over. We also included an option for people that weren't able to make it with a valid excuse so that we could account for everyone in the fraternity. The poll went well. We ended up having about 85% of the chapter that answered the poll. And we were able to eventually account for everybody. The day before the walk, the community service chair and I met up um, with a copy of our fraternity's roster, and we found the remaining people that hadn't replied to the poll. Um, we called them to make sure that they were able to attend. If they weren't able to attend with a valid excuse, that was okay. But if they were able to attend, we got them signed up for a shift so that every member in our chapter was accounted for. So the majority of the work was already done in the preparation for the walk, but the day of the walk actually came, April 14th, and I showed up at 6 a.m. and I was going to stay for the entirety of the event. My primary job was to ensure that our volunteers showed up, and I would call them if they were late, just asking them where they were at and making sure that they were coming to the event. Our volunteers were involved in the setup, tear down, cheering on the walkers, directing the walkers on where to go on the route, and passing out food and water along the route and also when they had finished. I'm proud to say that the event went off without a hitch. We had 95% attendance. At the actual event, we had 75 volunteers show up out of the 79 that were signed up. And finally, the results of the walk. Overall, there were 1,100 walkers at the event. 75 volunteers signed up and showed up from Delta Sigma Phi fraternity, my fraternity, and $90,000 were raised for MS research. Um, I'm proud to say that our fraternity played a huge part in the success of the event, and I would describe it I mean, I would describe the event as a huge success. Uh, I can't wait to go back again next year and volunteer with my brothers. And then finally, here is a list of the reference that I used in making this slideshow. Um, Thank you.